The first book in the series that John David Mann and I wrote, the original one was The Go-Giver. And that was inspired on a couple of levels. One is many years ago, my first book that I had, it was a how-to book. It was called Endless Referrals. And it was a book for entrepreneurs and salespeople who knew they had a great product or service. It brought lots of value to the marketplace, but they did not necessarily feel comfortable.
Ladies and gentlemen, we formally welcome Bob now. And Bob, I would just like to tell you that the community we have here is the people are basically from their mid-career, inching towards the senior career and looking for leadership positions. They have joined us when they felt that, they have the problems like office politics, they have the problems like confidence, they have the problems where they are not able to speak effectively. Sometimes it happens to them when there is a senior management, when there is a lot of pressure, so they are not able to communicate the way they should be communicating. So keeping all these things in mind, we have given them a simple formula called DRESS. So DRESS, why DRESS? Because it's a career grooming program. And, D stands for differentiator, how they can stand out from the corporate crowd. And then relationship with boss, R, E for exposure to senior management, S for soft skills, and the last S stands for smart LinkedIn profile. So that's how we are working on it. And yes.
No, I think that sounds wonderful. It kind of sort of covers all the very important areas. It's interesting when we talk about soft skills because, I call soft skills people skills. And, the reason why is because soft skills, which I know more is talking about, the software of a person as opposed to the hardware of a person. But soft skills always reminds me of something that, it's soft. It's really not, that important. Where soft skills to me are the most important. There's competency, which is, it's being excellent at what you do. And there are a lot of people who are very, very good. They're very capable. They're very competent at what they do. And I think that you can achieve and attain a certain amount of success by being very competent. What separates the reasonably successful person from the stratospherically successful person is those people skills. It's being able to work effectively with others in a way that you're able to attain the results you want by helping others feel genuinely good about themselves. And, I think that's really the difference maker. So, what I call people skills and what's often called soft skills, I think that is so very important. And I'm so glad that that's part of the DRESS acronym that you use.
Yes, Bob. Thank you so much. And in fact, some of the questions which we have been coming across are, there is an element called personal branding. And, we always talk about that how one can personally brand himself or herself to stand out of the corporate crowd. Mm-hmm. And there you talk about, sell yourself, selling more and selling in a way, in a go-giver style, adding value. Can you just try and bridge this gap in people's mind that, one is personal branding, which we really want that people should take on. And we use LinkedIn as a platform where, people keep putting their thoughts, keep putting their comments so that they can get more and more job opportunities and the job opportunities which they actually, love to do, the work which they love to do. They look forward to those opportunities. And when it comes to go-giver style, you always say add value to people's life, and then maybe you can get to the receiving end. So how would you like to bridge this gap? Is there a kind of a link between these two things, personal branding and giving value?
Well, sure. In a sense, branding is really what others think of you. Your brand is what others think of you. It's what they feel about you, what they recognize in you, what they think of when they hear your name or when they see you. We cannot control our brand, but we can influence our brand. We can influence our brand by by what we do. Now, in the second book of John David Mann's and my Go Giver series, and the Go Giver leader, Aunt Elle is the main mentor. And she says that to Ben, who is the protege in that story, she says, what you have to give, you offer least of all through what you say. Now, what you say is important. What you say is very important. We need to say things in a way that's, again, kind, diplomatic, tactful, communicates our message well. What you say is very important, but it's probably the least important. More important, of course, is what you do. But even more important is who you are. That's where your brand, your personal brand comes into play, because that's where your character comes into play. Character comes from a Greek word, an old Greek word, meaning scrape or scratch. It came to mean an engraved marking and eventually a defining quality. We could say character is what happens when life etches or scratches itself onto your soul, and that's fine. I'm not particularly poetic, so I would just say it's your defining quality. Actually, more accurately, the sum total of all one's qualities is their defining quality or character. It's interesting with people of high character because we always tend to know what they stand for, right? We tend to know where they stand. Now, that doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. Of course they do. They're human. It doesn't mean they don't course correct. Absolutely they do. That's very important. And it doesn't mean they're not flexible on strategy. Sure they are. But when it comes to those values-based decisions, they are absolutely immutable, immovable, and unchangeable. And that's why we respect them. That's why we trust them. That's their character. So that is our brand, is what people think of us, both in terms of, as Stephen M.R. Covey would say, both are the combination of our competence and our character. So that's the first part. That's our brand. In terms of adding value, sure. Why is that so important? Whether we're talking about sales itself, or selling ourselves in terms of getting the job we want, or selling ourselves in terms of advancing higher within the corporate structure, because it's all selling. We're selling ourselves. Now, why is value so important? Well, one of the things I talk about when I speak at sales conferences, okay, is I'll begin by saying, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, right? They're not going to buy from you because you need the money, and they're not even going to buy from you just because you're a really nice person. They're going to buy from you because they believe that ultimately they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And it's the same with employment. Nobody's going to pay you a salary and continue to pay you a salary because you have a mortgage payment to meet, or because you want to buy certain things, or because whatever. No, they're not going to advance you because you would like the advancement, right? Now, this is wonderful for that person who really has a heart for serving, a heart for giving value, a heart for wanting to make other people's lives better, because it becomes very congruent. The value you provide is very congruent with your personal value system. So I think the two, mesh very well together.
Amazing, Bob. I had a question for you. When you wrote a book like Go Giver Leader, what inspired you to write such a beautiful book? Also, was it inspired by any incident or any observation?
So the first book in the series that John David Mann and I wrote, the original one was The Go Giver. And that was inspired on a couple of levels. One is, many years ago, my first book that I had, it was a how-to book. It was called Endless Referrals, Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. That was the subtitle. And it was a book for entrepreneurs and salespeople who knew they had a great product or service that brought lots of value to the marketplace, but they did not necessarily feel comfortable going out into their local communities and building the kinds of relationships where people would want to do business with them directly and or refer them to others. So that was really a how-to book. the basic premise was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. But I'd always enjoyed reading business parables ever since I'd been in sales. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could take that basic premise and turn it into a business parable? Because parables, which are stories, tend to really connect with
Absolutely.
people on more of a heart-to-heart level, right? Because it's a story, it's emotional, it's and I did not act upon that for a while, but in the early 2000s, I began to write a magazine column where John David Mann was the editor-in-chief, and I knew of his reputation as a fantastic writer. He was certainly a wonderful editor. He was just so humble and kind and great to work with. And we, worked together every month, for about, I guess, a year or two while I was writing the column. So I had this idea for taking the basic premise of endless referrals and making it into a parable. But again, I'm a how-to author. I can tell a story from stage, but that's different from writing a fictional story. And so I asked John. He was the only one I asked. He was the only one I wanted to write this with. I shared this idea with him and just asked, would you like to be the lead writer and, work with me? And fortunately, he said yes. And so we got together. It only took a few months really to write up the story. The toughest part was finding a publisher, because we got rejected by 24 publishers before the 25th one took us on, and they've been a wonderful publishing partner. And so then after that, with the success of that first book, the publisher asked us to write several more if we would, and so we wrote, first Go Givers Sell More, which is the only book in the series that's not a parable. And then we wrote the Go Giver Leader, and then the Go Giver Influencer. And it's funny, John and his wife, Anna, and they're a lovely couple. They actually wrote a book called The Go Giver Marriage, where they took the principles of the Go Giver and they put it, in terms of marriage. But so that was really nice. But the four John and I wrote, the Go Giver Sell More, the Go Giver Leader, and the Go Giver Influencer. Those are all really, I think, inspired by the same thing, and that's an idea to put out into the marketplace the thought, the idea, the philosophy, however, that if you can move your focus off of yourself. That doesn't mean we deny our self-interest. We're human beings, right? But we place it to the side, right? Understanding that if we can do that, if we can take our focus off ourselves, if we can be less I-focused or me-focused and more you-focused, well, that's the beginning of the relationships. And not only is it a much more fulfilling way of conducting business, it's actually the most financially profitable way as well, because again, you're developing those relationships where people feel so good about you. They want to get to know you, they like you, they trust you, they want to be in relationship with you, they want to do business with you. And that's really why we wrote these. And we've just been we feel so fortunate that we've had great feedback from people through the years who a lot of them who'd already lived their lives that way long before they ever heard of the book, right? Because none of these principles are new, right? There's nothing new. It's just how we relate, time proven principles. But when you hear from people who say, yeah, this is how I built my business, or this is how I made it but nobody believes me, because they see on TV and in the movies and they read in books that you've got to be some horrible, ruthless, terrible person. So, so that was really the story behind it.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that so much, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bob. So I have one more question, which is very, very personal to me. And that's how my story started. Being an introvert, shy person, being brought up in a middle class family, I always used to wonder that when I sit into the meetings, I want to speak, I want to add value, I want to contribute to the, whatever mission the organization has. But because of my low self-confidence, because of my introvert nature, I was not able to contribute to the level where I wanted to. Now, at that stage, that barrier which comes into the picture, even though you are an introvert, but I know now a lot of introverts now, I also being coming out of that stage. This introvertness, how it can be tackled and how it can be, taken as a strength rather than taken as a weakness when it comes to adding value to people's life, adding value to the organization. This is somewhere question which is coming to everyone's mind right now, Bob, people listening to us, because most of them are introverts and most of them are having that passion to contribute, passion to bring in more value on the table, but somewhere that lack of confidence. So how this can be tackled?
I think that there is possibly a misperception. Tend to think of introverts as having a lack of self-confidence by nature, and I don't believe that's true at all. I think that introverts, because I am an introvert as well, even though people find that very difficult to believe, we derive our energy from being alone or with a very small group of people. We don't derive our energy from big crowds. I certainly don't. They exhaust me. But we think that and introverts typically are not as talkative, even when they're in a crowd. I remember that I was at a donut shop several years ago, and I was standing in line, and there was a little boy who was just talking up a storm. Okay. And one of the people in line said to his friend who was there, he said, "Well, that little boy will make a great salesman one day." And the implication was that because this young boy was very, very talkative, that he would make a good sales professional. That's not necessarily true at all. Extroverts and or talkative people might enjoy being with a crowd and doing a lot of talking and being the focal point, but that doesn't mean they're persuasive. That doesn't mean people are going to buy into their message. In fact, I would say less so. I would say, yes, that young boy could grow up to be a great salesperson one day if he is willing to stop talking so much and listen a lot more. And I think an advantage that we introverts have is that we're much more likely to listen. We enjoy placing our focus on the other person and letting them talk and talk and talk about themselves.